We have our Digital Service Act that it came into the force a little bit more than 1 year ago. And there is several formal proceedings going on against, we can say, all the big platforms, Meta platforms, Instagram, Facebook, also on X and with TikTok. And we are continuing the work. So there is not any new decisions made. So we are doing the investigations if they are complying with our rules.
Right. What I would like to understand is whether you are perhaps considering taking a softer approach to big tech, because stateside there's a couple of changes pointing in that direction. Now that perhaps you are looking also at some of your processes, are you considering a softer approach to the way you investigate the behavior of big tech?
We are having very clear legal basis and regulation rules in Europe. And of course, now we are fully enforcing those rules we have in the place. We have two, I think, very important regulation when it comes to big online platforms. One is Digital Market Act. It's about competition policy, that the big gatekeepers, they shouldn't misuse their very strong role on the markets. And another one, it's a Digital Service Act. And it's about how the big online platforms, how they should mitigate and assess the systematic risks they are posing, for example, for the people's well-being, for the democratic processes, for elections, for civic discourse. And there's several practices what they have to have on place. So those two important big pieces of legislation came into the force a little bit more than 1 year ago. And now we are enforcing those legislations, and we are doing it fully.
Right. We are aware of the legislation, Executive Vice President. What we would like to understand is whether perhaps you're feeling pressure from the fact that Donald Trump was re-elected stateside and that he seems to have close ties with big tech. Are you concerned about his re-election in this context? Are you feeling pressure from that point of view?
Of course, technologies, they are playing a very important role in our economy and in our societies, as we know. And in Europe, that's the reason also that we have set certain rules to Europe to make sure that we have very fair and also safe digital environment for all our citizens and also for our businesses. And of course, we think that this is the right approach for the Europeans. And then all the digital platforms which are operating in Europe, of course, they have to respect our rules in Europe, and that is very clear, and it's fair for everybody. We have same rules for all the companies, for European companies, for American and Chinese companies.
Right. I did see that you are looking at broadening the investigation into X under the Digital Services Act legislation after the conversation that Elon Musk had with the leader of the AfD. My question to you is, what sort of action are you prepared to take against Elon Musk if you find that he has actually breached the DSA?
This is not about Elon Musk. It's about X. The X as very large online platforms, they have to take their responsibilities and they have to assess and mitigate the risks. For example, what they are posing for the electoral processes and for the civic discourse. But the Commission is already investigating X on this, and the scope of investigation is already quite large. Of course, we are all the time monitoring that is there some new elements what we should look more, but now it seems that the scope is already covering the fields what it should cover.
So off the back of that conversation between Elon Musk and the leader of the far right, which took place on X, on that platform that you are investigating, my question to you, Executive Vice President, is whether you think that Elon Musk is actually a threat to European democracy.
In Europe, when it comes to Digital Service Act, it's important to make very clear also that that we are not regulating the content on the online platforms. And for example, freedom of speech is very much supported, and it's of course one of the main and core values of the European Union. But in the same time, we have to look also that online platforms, that they take their responsibilities, and for example, they are not boosting certain content, and there has to be transparency also on their recommender systems. And that's what we are looking.
And when do you expect to conclude that? When could we actually see the European Commission reaching conclusions involving the investigation on X?
Of course, I'm giving all my support for the services, for the technical work they are doing now. With X, already the preliminary findings, they were published in July of the first batch of these investigations. And now during the autumn, X has had time also to see the results of the investigation and also comply with our rules. And now we are also preparing, and the technical work is very much focusing to the next steps on that. But it's difficult to say the timeline, because of course we have to also work also in a very, very careful way and look that we have also the evidence what we need.
Are you getting all the evidence that you need from X? Is the company actually cooperating with you?
All these big online platforms, they are cooperating with European Commission, of course, because we have very strong legislation on place, and European Union is also a very important market, of course, for these digital online platforms. So yes, they are cooperating. Of course, they are always, as all the businesses are always, of course, defending their business models. But that is something what is very normal when we're working with the industries, of course, always.
I would like to move on the conversation to some of the announcements from Meta as well in recent times. They are changing their fact-checking rules stateside. It doesn't seem that they are going to do so on the European continent. But are you having conversations with Meta about also complying with the DSA? What's going on there?
About Meta, there is also an investigation going on against Meta on certain topics. But when it comes, for example, to fact checkers, it's not. We don't have that kind of obligation in our Digital Service Act that online platforms, they should use fact checkers, but they have to make sure that they are not spreading disinformation. So they have to have practices on place, but they can decide themselves that how they are mitigating the risks that they are not spreading misinformation, disinformation, for example.
But do you think that their latest move, therefore, actually could risk compliance with the DSA if they were to do it also in Europe?
Then they have to, because now Meta is one of the signatories. We have also code of conduct with big online platforms, and one of the conducts is about disinformation. So they are very also committed in Europe to look the disinformation part very seriously, of course. And in Europe, they have decided that they are using fact checkers on this, but they can also use other practices. But then they will inform the European Commission if they are making changes on that. And then, of course, it has to be looked that it's in line with our rules, what they are planning.
Executive Vice President, I would also like to get your thoughts on, more broadly, the competitiveness and the landscape for European tech companies in particular, because you are in charge of tech sovereignty. But yet, when we think about social media at this stage, it seems that we are very split. We're seeing different regulations in the United States, in Europe, in China. How can the European tech companies actually play a role, try to be competitive in this global landscape when it seems that we are so divided, particularly for social media users?
I think it's going to be the really most important task for this new commission, that we have to boost up our competitiveness in Europe. And of course, these technologies, they play a key part on this. Especially we will focus now to frontier technologies in Europe to boost investments and innovations when it comes to the fields of AI, quantum, and also semiconductors. So those are the frontier technologies where we are especially focusing now. But of course, we know that the technologies, they are playing a very important role in all our economies, and also we have to make sure that all our businesses are also applying these new technologies to be competitive in the future. So it's one of really our main priorities for the next years in Europe.
And just to draw the conversation to an end, Executive Vice President, I would also like to get your thoughts on security. This is also one of your remits. What I would like to understand off the back of that summit with the Baltic nations is how do you assess the level of risk for the European Union at this stage? Because NATO Secretary Mark Rutte actually said that he's deeply concerned about the security situation in Europe. How would you assess it as well?
I would say that we have to be prepared for very different threats, very different hybrid threats as well. Of course, to conventional threats, but also we can see that disinformation, propaganda, also migration, it's weaponized. We are really living a time when everything can be weaponized. We have seen it. And especially on this Baltic Sea summit, we were focusing how to protect our critical infrastructure, because we have seen that it's also under attack. So we have to be prepared for very different threats. And there we have to be very united, of course, the European Union, but also NATO allies.